My name is Stephanie Rogers, and I am the Executive and Artistic Director of the Anderson Center at Tower View in Red Wing. This video is part of the Artistic Response Team of Red Wing, a collaboration between the Anderson Center and 4 other arts organizations to respond to the coronavirus crisis and continue serving our local artists and our community with artistic content. It is my pleasure to be here today talking with David Husom. David, could you please tell us about your medium and how long your artistic practice has been a focus of your life?
I consider myself a photographer, but I have always seen photography in really broader terms. I studied photography and film. I recently have been involved more in installation pieces as well. And even my early photographs tended to mix drawing and painting along with photography. And I'm still very influenced by a lot of other art medium as well as just photography.
How did you get started as an artist?
Oh boy. Well, as a kid, I was in a camera club. My father and his father were both amateur photographers. I didn't think of it as a career. I was considered a good art student in junior high, but art at that point to me meant newspaper illustration or comics, which interested me a little bit. But I got interested more in electronics and particularly radio, and went into engineering in college and realized that I wouldn't have a soldering gun in my hand making things. And I drifted to architecture thinking that that would combine technology with something artistic. And at the time, it was mostly people building, well, Philip Johnson's IDS building was then under construction in Minneapolis. So there was this big push towards people working in teams and doing big buildings, which did not interest me. And I took a photography class thinking I needed a break. I knew how to develop and print. And the first day it was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. And I've been doing it ever since.
Were you thinking about photography in terms of fine art at that point in time?
Oh, I think that was the realization. It was the teacher. It was a guy named Jay Hines, who was a grad student in photography. And I could see what he and the other grad students were doing. I also became very aware of Andy Warhol's work. I would regularly go to, there was actually a gallery in the top floor of Dayton's, downtown Minneapolis at that point, that had really the newest art that was in New York would end up there. People like Warhol and Rauschenberg. And then I would go to the Walker regularly. And so certainly growing up, I had no concept of photography beyond weddings, portraits, and photojournalism, which I knew I didn't really have the mindset for. So it wasn't opening up very quickly, yes.
So it sounds like that's when you decided that you wanted to be an artist. Do you have a sense of when you think you actually considered yourself an artist?
Oh, geez. I think students tend to think themselves as artists right away. I worked really hard as a student, and I was in student shows very early on. I was in a show when I was in grad school still with photographer Frank Golke, who was just starting to do his grain elevator photographs that became well known for. And he made the comment that, well, you got to be 30 years old as a photographer to really do something good, great. And I dismissed it because I thought what I was doing, which at the time was non-silver photography, manipulated images and coloring. And I still look back, it was good work. But he was right on. The summer I hit 30, I started my fairground project, which is what I'm still really most well known for in the photo community. And maybe it's that old 10,000 hour rule that you have to practice. But as a student, I learned very little technical skills. And so it took a while to develop that, particularly to use a view camera and process sheet film and really make good particularly darkroom color prints, which really no one was doing at that point in 1978. So it takes a while.
So you've mentioned a couple of different projects and things that you work on. Are there recurring themes, whether images, ideas, that thread through different projects and different phases of your career?
Well, I think so. I think even with the gum bichromate printing, I was really drawn towards the vernacular, the American built cultural landscape. And certainly photographing fairgrounds was a big part of that. I got interested in digital in the late 90s, but moving to the Red Wing area in 2000, I just immediately started looking at the old town halls, neighborhood bars, small wooden churches, and saw them as a continuation of that vernacular. But the other thing that really influenced me too, as a painting student, I really wanted to do pop art, but I clearly was influenced by the hard edge abstract painters, and although I never really did sculpture very well, people like Dan Flavin, who did work with fluorescent light tubes, and Don Judd's boxes. And actually, the piece that was in the last Anderson show was a floor piece. And I had picked up a book of Richard Long at a used bookstore. Richard Long was a British artist in the 60s, still working today, who would do walks. He'd walk a perfect 5-kilometer straight line and photograph along the way as kind of a living sculpture. But he also did pieces where he would lay out, he would build constructions of like wood, of driftwood along a shore. And I kept looking at his photographs of these installations that were out in nature and thought, that's it. I want to do a long piece that would be on the floor. And that led to my taking the drone over the Red Wing boathouses and the piece that was in the last show.
For people at home who might not know what a gum bichromate print is, could you describe just a little bit of how that differs from, say, silver photography, which is what people think of when they think of black and white, maybe in layman's terms?
Yes, actually, when I was kind of finishing up my undergraduate photography studies, I went to the Art Institute of Minneapolis, and the curator, Ted Hartwell, started pulling out old camera work magazines and started passing them around the room, which you'd never do today. Of course, they're worth thousands of dollars. But I started seeing these pictures and these articles about gum bichromate. And so it's a process that really was very popular turn of the century, 1910, 1920, where I would coat paper with a mixture of this photosensitive chemical, ammonium dichromate, which replaces what would be silver in most photographs, mixed with watercolor paint. And so it was a way to produce a photograph that literally, by the time it got exposed and then you would wash it, was literally just watercolor paint on drawing paper. And it was my way of kind of working between photography and painting. So that led to my doing a series of 3 canvas prints in 1976 that would be considered giclée today. And they had the scale of a large painting, yet they were photographs. And I realized right then and there that just trying to bridge between photography and painting, I had brought it to the ultimate conclusion, and it was still a photograph. And at that point, I bought a view camera and saw Walker Evans' work and went out and started documenting architecture.
So what are you working on right now?
I haven't been working as hard as I should. I did do a video, which is online, of a train trip across to Australia, and I will post where that is here. And it's 15 minutes long, so it's kind of long for a YouTube video, but and it was shot with an iPhone, which I probably won't do again, but that interested me still a lot of working in video. I've also been playing around with 360-degree video. There is a time lapse I did at the Anderson opening of my show a couple of years ago that I'll also post online. But, and I did do some more of that work in Arizona just recently, which I have yet to have time to go through. But I'm not quite sure right now what the next step is. I mean, I had 3 one-person shows in the last year and a half. So I feel sort of a little tired of doing work on making big prints. And I'm getting more intrigued with the floors and the walls. Also, the idea of doing videos that you would walk into a gallery and have multiple monitors and engulf a space with that, which of course gets to be complicated and expensive. But I'm thinking of those kinds of things a lot right now.
Looking back over the course of your career, what has challenged you the most as an artist?
Well, I think all artists certainly face financial challenges, and I've been very fortunate. As an undergrad, I could see all of the grad students getting these incredible jobs at major universities around the country because it was this huge burst of photography education in the late 60s. By the time I got out, those people were sitting on their jobs and sat on them for 45 years. But I fell into something that was part-time temporary, and 50 years later, I'm still involved. I've also, although I'm a photographer primarily and at heart, my teaching has involved a number of other areas as well. So I've been able to survive that way. But it is a struggle to find the time, to find the energy, but it's just something you feel you have to do. I hate to say it's a calling, but there was a period I went through where I thought, I'm done being an artist and I'm just going to become a web designer. And it didn't work. The camera kept calling me back, and I realized, yes, I'm a photographer my whole life. This is what I do. This is how I relate to the world.
I can relate to that. Has your artistic practice changed at all in response to the coronavirus pandemic?
That's a really good question. And I've thought a lot about it. And there's a little part of me that thinks I should be out documenting. But realistically, you can find Red Wing streets deserted at various times, particularly on Sunday mornings and things. Because I did do a lot of photography early in the morning with the drone photographs. So I was out there at sunrise. And I've even been in downtown Minneapolis on a Saturday or Sunday, and it's been empty. So although the images we're seeing of New York City are very compelling in that sense, I don't think they're very meaningful here. And I think professional journalists will be out there documenting the horrors of the coronavirus. So I'm not sure as artists what we can do. I did hear from someone just yesterday who was involved in a mail art project. And mail art was kind of big, maybe 25 years ago, and always has been kind of around. But she was part of a group that was doing mail art again, which the idea is you create small pieces of art that you then mail to other people, and that eventually these get accumulated someplace and maybe even exhibited, but as a way of continuing to share your artwork. So I think there's some things going on out there that are pretty interesting. Certainly, I think people posting on Facebook has increased dramatically, as well as Instagram and YouTube videos. I'm finding I'm teaching an online class right now on kind of business practices, and a good portion of the students are in the creative fields. And a lot of them are talking about things like podcasting and video. So there's a lot of possibilities out there right now.
You've been an educator for a while and you still work with college students. What advice would you give to an aspiring artist?
Well, the one thing I keep thinking about reading about the 9th Street women and thinking about my own time when I first got out of school is that there were these communities that would develop. And you get to a certain point. Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner moved out to the Long Island, and that's why we moved out to Red Wing. But I think you have to be in a community when you're a student and fresh out. Meet other artists, share art with them. There's so many more opportunities for showing art, but it really is it's hard work, and it's the realization too that it never gets easier. I mean, yes, I understand exposure and how to use a camera and can do it blindfolded incredibly well. But there's still those struggles that if it gets too easy, you're probably doing something wrong and you have to keep challenging yourself.
That's a great segue. So how are you continuing to challenge yourself, and what are your long-term artistic goals?
Well, I'm playing with a $300 360-degree camera, which the technology is not bad for the money, but you can't really share your work very well. It's really meant for be seen on an iPhone or an Android. So that's certainly challenging. The Australian video, I worked on it for almost 2 years, editing it and picking out sounds for it. And I really enjoyed that process, but I also realized that I did all this work with a very low end iPhone. Um, that's challenging. It's been around for years, but I just downloaded GarageBand. And the idea of sounds and visuals is interesting to me right now as well. As far as where I'm going to be, I guess I'm just going to keep working, and hopefully all of us in Red Wing and the arts community survive this virus. And I think it's going to be a long time before we get back to any kind of real normal. So just hang in there and keep working.
Yeah.
I'm inspired just from talking to you. I now want to do some work.
It's great talking to you too. It's great to hear maybe a little foreshadowing of what we might see coming from your experiments and your artistic practice in the near future. Before we say goodbye, why don't you tell people listening where they can find your work online? Do you have a website or social media channels?
I do have a website. My wife Anne Marie and I have a business, and our website is husomrose.com. But I have my own, which should be updated in the project to work on this summer, is davidhusom.com. And I do have a Vimeo channel, and I'll post a little video of that. And that has the 360-degree opening as well as some other experiments. But I have a new YouTube channel that has the Australian video on it.
Great. And you and Anne Marie also run a printing and a photo restoration business. So if people are wanting to support you as artists or work on their family archives at this point in time, they could hire you to do photo restoration of old family photos or printing of personal photos. Is that correct?
That is true. And we're doing stuff by mail. They send me files, particularly photographers will send files and make prints. Yeah.
Great. You've done beautiful work in printing for the Anderson Center of some of the old Anderson family photos that are on display in our barn. And so I hope that you continue to find customers for that wonderful service that you offer to both the local community and the artistic community.
Well, thank you very much. And I do love those big Anderson photos. I think that was also partly what encouraged me to want to work large too. It was Robert Hedin just kept saying, I want jumbo pictures. And give me the jumbo ones.
Great. Well, thanks so much, David.
Thank you. It was great talking to you, Stephanie.
You too.
Stay well, stay safe.
Absolutely. Take care and be well.